Welcome to the Steve Stine Guitar Podcast, where we bring you the latest insights, tips, and techniques to help you master the art of guitar playing. I'm your host, Steve Stine, and I'm committed to sharing my passion for the guitar while inspiring you and guiding you through your musical journey. Now remember that you can enjoy this podcast from anywhere and anytime, whether you're cruising down the highway, preparing dinner in the kitchen, or even working out at the gym. By incorporating the podcast into your daily routine, you'll be able to stay inspired and motivated in your guitar journey, no matter where life takes you. Now, let's dive into today's podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about 5 steps that I think are going to help you a lot in learning how to improvise with more fluidity in your playing. Now, regardless of the key or the scales that you know or whatever, you can start this anytime you want, anywhere you are in your guitar journey, as long as you're working on scales and things like that. So basically what we need to do before we even begin, we need to make sure that we find or create a backing track that is comfortable in the key, the tempo, and the groove. All right. So in order to practice what we're going to try and do here, you want to choose something that is in a key that you're probably already working on. I'm going to be using E minor in this case. Maybe E minor is good for you. Maybe A minor is good. The point is don't choose something that's uncomfortable for you and then try and build this. Start with something that's already good for you. Tempo is very important because a lot of the things we're going to be talking about today are going to be based technically on your ability of being able to move around the fretboard and create things. So if the tempo is way too fast, you're setting yourself up for failure already. So maybe choose something that's a little bit slower. You know, if you practice with a metronome on a regular basis, you already kind of know what skill sets you have relative to those practice regimens. So, and the third thing is the groove, making sure that you've got something that feels good, whether it's a swing groove or kind of a straight feel, whatever it might be. Find something that feels good to you. And then the last thing before we get started is make sure you set yourself up with a guitar tone that feels good to you. Now I'm going to be playing with some delay and reverb on here. Okay, that's what I'm going to be using for this. It's just kind of a lead tone, but you could use anything you want. Point is if you really want to get comfortable with this, make a good sounding guitar tone for you that feels good to you and is kind of motivational for you. If you're playing, with a guitar tone that isn't really working, it's going to be frustrating to begin with. All right. I find that very important. All right. So let's get to the 5 things. The first thing I'm going to call travel capacity. Now, the backing track, again, that I'm going to be using is going to be in E minor. Travel capacity is your ability to be able to move around inside a particular position across the fretboard, whatever it is that your capability is or you want it to be, all right? Learning how to travel around. So that might mean moving up and down, right? Again, I'm in E minor pentatonic or diatonic. So my ability to move up and down a particular position, or maybe I'm moving side to side, more horizontally. Whatever it might be. Another thing to be aware of is when you jump over things. You might jump over strings, which we call string skipping. But you might also jump over notes moving horizontally. I mean, there's lots of different kinds of things that you can do to make it sound interesting, but the point is your capacity of being able to move around while the music is playing. If you only know one position, it's going to be very difficult to move anywhere else on the fretboard, and that's okay. You'd want to work in that position, right? But the point is as you keep doing this, you can keep expanding how much you know of the fretboard and how confident you are with being able to travel around it. Okay? So you could use pentatonic, you can use diatonic, whatever you want. The last thing I'll say is just a term that I use. It's called closed versus open playing. And when you try and play things that are maybe a bit more traditional in the blues sense or a classic rock kind of sense, you tend to play a bit closed in a position. Kind of that sort of thing. Great playing. Okay, lots of stuff you can do with that. Open position playing for me is when you try and think about things that are a bit wider with that kind of sound. It's just a mentality for me, but it makes a big difference. When I want to play something maybe that's a little more, Allman Brothers or something like that, I might think a little more closed. If I was thinking a bit more of something like Joe Satriani or something, I might be thinking a bit more open. Just something to think about a little bit when you're practicing this. So let's go through travel capacity. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play this track for you. It's just E minor, C, and D is all I'm using in this, okay? So listen to it just a little bit. Dun, 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 so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to think about where the quarter note is going to be. And it doesn't matter if you call it a quarter note. It's just where am I tapping my foot or, snapping my fingers or whatever. And then I'm going to go with double that, and then I'm going to go with double that. And those are basically the three things that I have to work with as I'm moving around my fretboard, as I'm traveling. Dun, 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 dun. Now, I'm probably going to lean toward the slower subdivision first, just to get used to things. But I want to be aware of those. So let me just kind of show you as best I can, without using these other ones, kind of what I'm talking about here. Idea. Now, I am using some of these other things too, and let's talk about those. So my travel capacity is my comfortability of being able to move around inside a position, multiple positions, one particular scale like pentatonic, maybe I'm using some diatonic in there, whatever it is, but really getting comfortable with my capability of organically moving around the fretboard in this key at this tempo with this groove, right? So the next thing is what I'll call rhythmic phrasing. Now, rhythmic phrasing is going to be pausing. So we're creating sentences, right? That's really what we're doing. Now, the sentences that we're creating might be a little longer at times, might be shorter at times, might be just one note that we're hanging on. Or maybe we're literally stopping playing the guitar and leaving some pause. These are all rhythmic things that we can do with these subdivisions, quarter note, eighth note, 16th note, if you will. I can use any of those. So becoming aware of this rhythmic thing that I can do when I'm playing. Now, the phrasing may occur in one of two ways. Either it's occurring because I'm intentionally trying to stop somewhere because I want a phrase to be a certain length. And sometimes the phrasing occurs because my brain is getting frozen and I'm out of ideas at that moment, and that's okay. That's a reality. You might be doing something, and all of a sudden, you're at that moment in time, you're at a loss. So that might be a good time to stop, reset yourself. Maybe it's somewhere else on the fretboard. Maybe it's just something that you're thinking about, or just moving to somewhere else in that same position, and then start up again. So as I'm moving around. See, now all of a sudden you'll notice I'm going to start using some phrasing. Now, I don't have to stop necessarily. I don't have to go, I can and I should. Sometimes it's just pausing on a note and allowing that note to ring out. And learning how to do that in different places so everything doesn't sound like... You see where the phrase is the same over and over and over. Now, we're going to get to repetition in a little bit, and that can be beneficial, and we should use it. But at this point, what we're really trying to do is just learn how to almost scat sing with our traveling around the fretboard. Let me start this track again, okay? So just, again, being aware that I can pause on a note in a phrase, in a movement across the fretboard, this traveling that I'm doing, to create larger or smaller phrases. I can stop playing. I can simply pause and hold on a note. There's lots of different kinds of things that I can do. Doing that on a bend is a great thing to do. For instance, you might play... and stay there for quite a long period of time. So everything doesn't always have to be about how fast you go, although you do want to develop that aspect of your ability on the fretboard. Again, I hate to always bring this up, but it comes back to that thing where people say, well, there's more feel in one note than 1,000 notes. Well, maybe that's true, but if you're only playing one note for an entire solo, it's going to get awfully boring after a while, right? So you've got to be able to use dynamics and diversity in your playing. So if you're playing bum, 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 decka, 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 you're moving between these subdivisions, it's going to keep things interesting. If you're being aware of pausing or stopping on different beats, creating different sizes of phrases, it sounds interesting. The whole point is, I call it dynamic contrast. You're trying to keep things interesting for a listener. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is repetition. And repetition for me is really important because that's where we'll do something, whether it's intentional or it's just accidental or what we can call organic. We can start doing something over and over and over, and it creates this energy within itself. And the audience or the listener will hear that and go, oh, okay, I'm aware of what's happening and I can hear it because obviously it's happening over and over and over. Versus just one long, run-on concept, we can use repetition. So sometimes we use a particular, maybe a lick that we've learned, and we want to add that in. Maybe we're just moving around and we create some element of repetition that we like and we want to continue doing it. So what I'm going to do is start again, just kind of jamming here and show you what I mean. So I'm going to use a little repetition in more of an organic way and then more of a lick-based way. Organic, and then you see right there, that might be more of a lick that I'm adding in, an idea that I've practiced that I can fit into this groove, into this tempo, and it sounds kind of cool. I don't need to be led by the licks, right? Sometimes we think, well, we have to learn a bunch of licks, and maybe you do. There's nothing wrong with that. But for me, when I teach, I always try and get people to understand that the confidence and the ability to be able to navigate across the fretboard, this traveling, if you will, is what really gives you this ability to be in control at all times, especially if you can do it at the tempo, of course, that the musical situation that you're in has a tempo that you're comfortable with, that you can do this with. If the tempo gets faster, it's going to start limiting what things you can do, and that's okay. You're going to have to be a little careful. Or the next song might be more in your tempo, something that's more comfortable for you. So you just have to be aware of these things all the time. If the key is awkward or the tempo's too fast or something, you got to rein it in a little bit, right? But when it's something that's right in your wheelhouse, you can really let go and do whatever you want. So repetition can be used all over the place. So I'm going to, again, start kind of meandering here, traveling around. And then if I come across something, I'm going to try and make some sort of repetition with it. So... So now we get to the next one, which is sequences. Now, at this tempo or whatever's comfortable for you, what's really nice is if you can develop something that has a bit more energy And I'm going to show you just a simple sequence idea. So let's say I was doing something where I'm in E minor, but I'm going to look at this as E minor diatonic, okay, natural minor, not just pentatonic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this idea, so I'm just playing the scale, but I'm just going one back and then going up from there, and then going back, and then back, and I'm going forward each time. Now, when I do this, I could stay in this position, or at any time I could shift out and start traveling. So I might do something where I go, I don't have to stay in this one position. I can go wherever I want. But this works really well when you're trying to jam over something. You don't have to do it for a long time, but it adds this repetition through a sequence that sounds kind of cool. So sequences are really nice for just adding some extra flair to what you're doing. They take practice, and you got to work on, a particular pattern that you like or whatever. And then the last thing I'll say is just this whole thing is at some point learning how to give all of this a purpose, which is melodic connection. Okay, now primarily I'm in the key of E minor here, so E would be a great note for me to try and target. And I can learn to target the other notes in each chord. People are always saying, well, what about the third or what about the fifth? You can target whatever you want, okay, as you learn all of these things. But in the beginning, just keep it nice and easy. If you can learn where the E is, and then maybe you lead, and you go to an E. And you don't have to go to the E every time and in a certain place all the time. The point is if you're never really making an intentional melodic connection, it's all just accidental. Hopefully you'll land on the right note at the right time. Listen, it happens, and we all do it, to a certain degree where, you try and get lucky here and there. But if you do it all the time, there's never consistency in creating some sort of melody. So before you worry about going to the root and then going to the third and then going to the fifth and then going to each note of the chord, start with something really easy, because if you start overthinking this, oftentimes your listener will lose you're thinking too hard and you're trying too hard and you're doing too much, and the melody goes away. Think about it. Think about really basic things that you might hear. Again, if I start this. Make something up that's just really basic, but it has a theme and it has a melody that you can identify with, versus just going to notes all over the place going, well, that was a fifth and that was a third, but that was a third to that chord. You might be able to make that work, but you need to be aware of creating maybe a theme when you're doing this. And an easy place to start is just start with the theme of just going to, for instance, in the note E. Again, you don't have to do it every time. You don't have to go to it every measure, right? But just become aware of directing your motion towards something. And in this case, it would be that note E. So hopefully this helps you in better understanding some approaches that you can take to make your improvisation sound and feel more natural. If you like our podcast and want to hear more, remember to press the subscribe button on the app that you listen to. By doing this, you help us a lot, and you'll be the first to know when we have new episodes ready for you to listen to. Is this podcast fun and useful? Then please give it a thumbs up and write about how much you like it. Is this podcast not what you thought it would be? Please let us know. This helps us to make our podcast better and helps more people who love guitar find it as well. So don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us what you think.